Chapter 8, Famous Dark Triad Personalities. It is not enough to read about the traits that dark triad personalities embody, it must also be acknowledged that dark triad persons have names and have lived among us either in our time or before. In all of history, there have been persons who have acted so outrageously in all their dark triad glory for all to see. This chapter is dedicated to those individuals who have left, or continue to leave, their dark mark in the world. Alexander the Great. Son of Philip II of Macedon and Olympias, Alexander the Great was a king of the ancient Greek kingdom known as Macedon and a raging narcissist as well. Alexander believed that he was destined for greatness and that anything that existed within his imagination was attainable in real life, regardless of the expense. His mother did not make things any better for him. She had lofty ambitions for him. He sought to actualize these ambitions all his life, and it is no wonder that he ended up being named the Great in recognition of his fierce achievement as an unrivaled military commander. Perhaps the greatest indication that Alexander was a narcissist is the fact that he thought of himself as a deity. In other words, he thought himself to be a god. Again, his mother had led him to believe that he was the son of Zeus, the king of the Greek gods. Further, Alexander was fond of downplaying his own father's achievements to his friends. In his eyes, these achievements did not matter, and the only wins that counted were those that had his name on them. He was constantly worried that his father did not leave him any legacy that counted. In response, he made it his business to win as many battles as he could. He took his army on endless battles in a quest for his own personal glory. It did not matter who lost their lives or got injured. Alexander was on a mission to create his own legacy, and anything or anyone who stood in his way was the enemy. Napoleon Bonaparte. Bullied as a young boy, Bonaparte rose through the ranks to become a general in the French Revolution at the age of 24. Unfortunately, Bonaparte carried with him the effects of his bullying and low self-esteem, otherwise referred to as an inferiority complex. While he was able to achieve a legacy that many men of his time did not, Napoleon carried with him the psychological scars of his past. It is believed that Napoleon lashed out and acted aggressively to make up for his shortcomings. Which shortcomings, you might wonder? For starters, Napoleon was shorter than the average man. Standing at 5 feet and 2 inches, it is easy to see why Napoleon may have been insecure about his height. His stature notwithstanding, Napoleon believed that he was something special and even wrote about it in his book aptly named Thoughts. In the book, Napoleon talks about how he had come to believe that he was special and could go forth to achieve things that he had only previously believed to be fantasy. At the end of the day, it's probably unfair to fault Napoleon for turning to narcissism to cheer himself up. He was probably only trying to make up for the feelings of inadequacy that he had grown to be familiar with thanks to his childhood taunts from his classmates and schoolmates. Adolf Hitler. Who is the most self-absorbed person that you currently know of? Take that person's thoughts, behaviors, and actions and then multiply them 1,000,000 times. What do you get? Adolf Hitler, that's what. Adolf Hitler lived in the early 1900s, so he must have done some pretty bad things to be still talked about today. And indeed, he did. Not only did Adolf believe that his race was better than everyone else, but he also had to get everyone else on the propaganda machine too. As a result, millions of Jews lost their lives thanks to the calculations and machinations of one man whose narcissism and thirst for power got out of hand. Hitler's leadership style was structured such that he was at the top, and nobody else could question him. His inferiors were to take these commands unquestioningly because he believed he knew better than everyone else. While his generals were killing the Jews left, right and center, Hitler had no empathy for those dying and suffering. In fact, he wanted this murder spree to continue for as long as it could, or at least until he was able to wipe out the inferior race. Hitler will forever be remembered as the reason for one of the biggest wars ever witnessed on Earth, and all because he believed that he and white Germans were superior to everybody else. Charles Manson. Charles Manson is one of the most well-known cult leaders of modern American history. Manson was an unemployed ex-convict who utilized psychopathic manipulation to create himself a following, which he named the Manson family. Manson had an ability to convince young people to join his family by preying on their weaknesses and making them feel as if he was their safe place and messiah. After drawing them in, Manson then convinced them to commit crimes on his behalf. In the summer of 1969, for instance, Manson's family killed 9 people on his command. Even after being arrested, Manson showed no remorse or guilt for the suffering he had inflicted on others. He had a disregard for humanity that can only be described as callous. That being said, Manson was also highly charming, and this caused people to gravitate towards him. Even while in prison, Manson was still able to use his psychopathic charm to lure women, even to the point of getting engaged to one. Albert DeSalvo. Nicknamed the Boston Strangler, Albert DeSalvo was a criminal who confessed to killing 13 women in the Boston area, by way of strangulation. DeSalvo was a typical psychopath. Right from childhood, he exhibited the signs of a psychopath. For instance, he tortured animals. This is a typical warning sign that you might have a young psychopath on your hands. Kids who torture animals often go on to commit other heinous crimes later on. Many murderers and serial killers have a history of animal abuse in their past. What's most notable about DeSalvo's murders was that most of his victims were elderly and alone at the time of the attacks. While most people are capable of showing pity, mercy, and overall empathy on the elderly, DeSalvo was quite the opposite. He knew that this was a vulnerable group that could be easily subdued to fulfill his dark desires. It is reported that DeSalvo had an extraordinary sex drive, which is another sign of a person that may be predisposed to psychopathic tendencies. DeSalvo also liked to brag outrageously about his conquests, sexual and others. His tendency for exaggeration led some people to believe that he was not really the Boston Stranger even after he confessed to the killings. Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was an American serial killer who was found guilty of the rape, murder, and dismemberment of 17 boys between the period of 1978 to 1991. Dahmer's crimes were too horrid that it is difficult to imagine that a human being actually committed them. Not only did he kill his victims, but he also performed necrophilia and cannibalism on their corpses. Dahmer's childhood was not any more eventful than the typical childhood of a kid growing up in America during his time. That being said, some sources intimate that Dahmer was ignored by his parents as an infant. A lack of attention and affection, and overall neglect can cause a kid to develop into a full-blown psychopath later on in his life. Dahmer's mother had a myriad of issues that she had not worked through, and his father was unavailable most of the time. As a result, Dahmer was left to fend for himself and find ways to occupy his time. Growing up, Dahmer was largely reserved. He, however, did have a reasonable number of friends that he could talk to and play with. His friends reported Dahmer having an interest in animals. That in itself would not be a problem if that's all it was. Instead, the interest spiraled into something darker and sinister. As a child, Dahmer collected large insects and roadkill and went on to dismember this at his home or in the woods near his home. This should have been his parents' first sign that something was wrong, but reports have it that the parents were preoccupied with other matters that did not include nurturing their son. Later on, as Dahmer's fascination with animal carcasses and bones grew, he reached out to his father and asked to be taught how to bleach animal bones. His father, happy that his otherwise reserved son was reaching out, demonstrated the proper way to bleach bones. Dahmer would use this knowledge to clean the carcasses he continued to collect. Dahmer was 18 years old when he started targeting human victims. His first victim was a young man by the name of Stephen Hicks, who was a hitchhiker that he picked up and lured to his house on the pretext of enjoying some alcoholic drinks together. After this first murder, Dahmer dissected his victim's body and buried it in a shallow grave in his yard. Then he continued to live his life as if nothing had happened, no guilt and no remorse. In the course of his life up until when he got caught, Dahmer went on to steal the lives of 12 more unfortunate victims. Amy Bishop. Amy Bishop was a biology professor who worked at the University of Alabama in Huntsville up until February 2010 when she walked into the university complex and killed 3 of her colleagues. 3 other people sustained severe but non-fatal injuries from this attack. There are several reasons why Amy Bishop makes this list. First, Amy exhibited clear signs of narcissism when she went around letting everyone know that she had earned her PhD from Harvard. It was almost the very first thing that she told you upon meeting. By virtue of having a degree from Harvard, Amy believed herself to be better than everyone else. She thought of herself as a capable professor who was deserving of tenure, despite the fact that her students had complained about her abilities and teaching methods on numerous occasions. Much earlier, before she killed her colleagues, Amy had shot her brother in what was later ruled as an accident. Some sources intimated that Amy might have killed her brother deliberately because he was getting the attention that she thought she deserved. On the day of the murders, Amy attended a faculty meeting and sat quietly as it progressed. She appeared to be calm and just being her normal self. About 40 minutes later, Amy calmly pulled out a handgun and started shooting. She was subdued after killing 3 faculty members and injuring 3 others. It is interesting to note that Amy planned to kill her colleagues after getting denied tenure at the university. Despite her otherwise poor performance as a professor, Amy believed that she deserved tenure. In her mind, she was the best of the best, and nobody else had a greater right to be at the university. Amy lost her tenure in 2009, and it was not until 2010 that she killed her colleagues. It is clear to see that she was cold and calculating and took the time to come up with just the right plan to eliminate her enemies. Amy's actions throughout her life point to a person that was highly narcissistic and psychopathic as well. A member of a writing group that Amy belonged to is cited as saying that Amy came across as a person who felt entitled to praise. She is also said to have been abrasive in her interactions with others. No doubt, these individuals are just a drop in the ocean of dark triad personalities that have walked on this earth. With psychologists suggesting that psychopaths make up about 1% of the general population, it goes without saying that making a list of all psychopaths ever to exist would be a lifelong task. How to talk to your child about dark psychology. Other than the cases where there are classic warning signs of psychopathy such as the abuse of animals, you might have noticed that a whole lot of the personalities listed in the previous sections went through a normal childhood. If you are a parent, the safety of your children is paramount. The kind of concern you feel towards your children extends from their interaction with other people to their own internal dialogue taking place without anybody else's notice. In other words, you want to know that your child is safe when with other people and when alone as well. It is especially disconcerting to know that there are people in this world who use their time, thoughts, and efforts to hurt children. While there is not especially much that you can do to change that kind of people, you can prepare your child to deal with the kind of people who are more likely than not to use dark psychology to take advantage of others. Make your home your child's safe haven. Your home should be where your child feels safest. The outside world is not the friendliest place there is out there. There are bullies in school, pedophiles lurking in parks and playgrounds, and child killers who have no qualms about ending young lives. When your child is done dealing with all the dangers presented by the modern world, they should always have a safe place to come to. This means that you must be careful about who you invite into your house at all times. Many times, the people who take advantage of children are people who are well known to them. As such, it helps to vet who make it into your child's life and who doesn't. Besides making the home physically safe by making it inaccessible to predators, you must also be your child's safe place emotionally. Children who know that they can count on their parents have an easier time opening up about the challenges they are facing, which will include that worrisome conversation they had with the creepy uncle during the last family get-together. Be vigilant about what your child is watching and listening to. When predators are unable to access children physically, they make use of other virtual channels to do their evil work. Parents of millennials and other older generations had an easier time as far as keeping the predators away. Predators back then approached kids while they walked to school, at the playground, in shopping malls, and in other places that were easy to monitor. Predators of today have gotten smarter and will enter your home even when you have locked all doors. Thanks to smartphones and the internet, there is probably someone spying on your kid or trying to feed your kid information that they are better off without. If you must buy a smartphone for your teen, make sure you give them a long, hard talk about the dangers that lurk on the interweb. Monitor the type of content that your kid is watching and make the use of parental controls that are offered by most video platforms. Do not allow your child to make friends with strange people on the internet. Some of these strangers who contact children on the internet have the worst of intentions, including being involved in child trafficking rings. Do not sugarcoat truths. When your child is young and incapable of understanding harsh truth, you'll most likely do your best to sugarcoat the truth so that you do not give them weeks of endless nightmares. For example, you'll not tell your kid that their goldfish died. Instead, you'll lie to them that little Mr. Bean went to live in another fish tank with his best fish friends. This is a normal part of parenting that involves wanting to shield your young one from the cruel realities of the world. As your child grows older, however, it is important to let them hear the truth from you before they start hearing half-truths from other people. Kids are very impressionable and tend to believe what adults tell them. You must ensure that your child's first point of contact is yourself. Do not let a predator creep into your child's life under the guise of being their go-to person. If something bad happens in the community, explain this gently to your child and let them know that bad people who want to harm other people exist and they live among you, and there are certain signs that she should look out for. Be the parent. Yes, you want to make sure that your child likes you. Nobody wants to be hated by their kid. At the same time, you must acknowledge that winning a popularity contest is not your first priority as a parent. Your child is free to think of you as a party pooper as long as you are focused on keeping them safe. If something does not sit right with you, use your authority as a parent to question it until your gut instinct approves. Your sulking teenager will not be in their teens forever, and once they are older, they will be grateful that you looked out for them when they needed it most. Stay ahead of the game. Predators are constantly changing the rules of the game because they know the rest of the population is catching up. For instance, some predators have taken to placing harmful messages in seemingly harmless kids' videos and other content. Online games and the constant social media challenges are also at times used to manipulate and influence children to engage in practices that are harmful to them. As a parent, you must ensure that you are aware of the trick and treachery being used to manipulate your kid and then nip this in the bud before it is too late. What if your child is the problem? Nobody wants to believe that their child might be anywhere near being a psychopath, sociopath, or narcissist. And yet, adults who score highly on the dark triad were once children. We want to believe the best of our children, but perhaps this is the denial that causes parents to miss out on opportunities of helping the kids get help before it is too late. First, it is important to note that psychologists are not fond of calling children psychopaths even when these children exhibit behaviors that are worrying and abnormal. This is simply because the term itself carries too much stigma and finality. When a child is called a psychopath at age 6, who is not to say that they will not aspire to grow to live up to the name? Also, children are just that. They may be troublesome as kids and then turned out to be something totally different when they are older. Instead of antisocial personality disorder, therefore, children are often diagnosed with conduct disorder. In order for this diagnosis to be given, a kid must meet certain criteria that have been agreed upon and behave in a manner to exhibit these criteria for at least 6 months. What this means is that a teenager who behaves aggressively in 1 or 2 instances is not exactly a candidate for conduct disorder. More likely than not, they are just having a bad day. So, who qualifies for the conduct disorder spectrum? A child that has a high chance of becoming a psychopath in their later life exhibits the following characteristics. They extremely lack in empathy. This is the sort of child who will not flinch when their friend gets hurt on the playground. In fact, you might even catch them laughing at the pain of others. They lack remorse and guilt. A child who does not have remorse or guilt will do wrong and not feel the need to apologize for it. They might hit their little brother or hurl the family pet against the wall and smile about it. When asked to apologize, they will be stubborn and might even completely refuse to cooperate. They are indifferent to punishment. Most children get very dramatic when punished. They sob their little hearts out and even try to make you feel bad about punishing them. Not so for children with conduct disorder. More often than not, such children will not care for the punishment. They will not be moved one bit and will ensure that you know they are not moved. This is simply because they do not experience pain and emotions like everybody else. Lastly, adults who went on to become full-on psychopaths exhibited signs of aggression and cruelty in their childhood. Because a child is a tiny individual who does not have much strength to take on bigger victims, children will often target helpless animals to take out their aggression and cruelty on. If one day your child wakes up and kills the family cat, you should be very worried. What do you do when you are faced with a child who displays all these signs? The first thing you need to do is understand that not every psychopath is headed for doom and destruction. As mentioned earlier in this book, some psychopaths go on to become very successful in their fields because of their risk-taking, laser-sharp focus. A child that is seemingly destructive and restless can be molded to become something great in their life. Instead of worrying that your child will become a serial killer, think about how you can turn them into the next world-famous CEO. A good thing about kids is that they are easy to distract. Keep your child busy, and they will not have the time to think about all the cruel things they could be doing with their thrill-seeking selves. Depending on the nature of the disorder that is present in the child, there might be a need for professional intervention. Professionals who work with kids that exhibit psychopathic behaviors do not try to change them because they know that it is all in the brain, and there's not much that you can do. Instead of changing the kids, the professionals instead opt to work with what is left of the good brain to push the kids towards good behavior. For instance, even though a psychopath's brain might not be capable of empathy and emotion, they are still able to recognize reward and the excitement of getting that reward. What clinicians do therefore is to train the kid to do good in exchange for a reward. Psychopaths love winning, and the same is true for kids who exhibit psychopathic tendencies. This reward approach is also used in prisons where the population of psychopaths tends to be higher. If you have a child who is showing signs of being a problem child, as far as the listed signs go, you must be very careful about how you call out the problem. The messages that children hear about themselves are what they grow up to believe. If a child grows up being called stupid, they will live out their stupid to the best of their ability. A child, regardless of their psychopathic disposition, will grow into something great if they hear reinforcing messages about themselves. Nurture may not always win over nature every time, but it is always worth a shot. It might be thinking of something empowering to say to a child who kills little animals, but labeling them as a killer will only give them something to aspire to. Conclusion. There is no doubt that hearing there are people out there whose sole purpose in life is to manipulate and influence others is not comforting news. This is the kind of information that is guaranteed to make you skeptical about all your interactions. You might find yourself wondering whether the people in your life like you for you or for the things that you are able to provide. While it is true that there are bad people out there, it is also true that there are some pretty good people living among us. The good news is that the number of people who measure highly on the narcissism, psychopathy and Machiavellianism scales is much lower than the number of people who measure much lower on the same scales. What this means is that not everybody is out to get you. At worst, 1 out of 5 people is out to get you. For example, if you have 5 bosses, one of them is likely to be a psychopath. This is not too bad. You just have to make sure you get the other 4 on your team, and you will be good to go. In all seriousness, however, it helps to stay conscious of the bad sides and the good sides to life and people. This book is an acknowledgement of the bad sides that exist, which sometimes can be used for good, depending on how you look at it. A Machiavellian leader who is committed to protecting his people at whatever cost, for instance, can be a great asset to have in a community. That being noted, it is also important to acknowledge the many ways that smart people use to manipulate others into doing not-so-smart things. The chapters on brainwashing and hypnosis are particularly useful if you want to refresh your memory on the many ways people are controlling your mind against your will. This book is not a call for you to live nervously and in fear. Bad things and bad people have existed since the beginning of time, and this did not stop billions of people from living their lives to the fullest. As much as this book calls for your guard to be up as far as keeping out the predators, it is also an assurance that you can let your hair down once in a while. As long as you know who's hunting you and how they are hunting you, you can allow yourself to relax when the predators are away. Lastly, should you wish to flip the tables on the predator, you can go ahead and apply any of the tactics suggested in the book. Just make sure that you can deal with your conscience after the fact. The reason why psychopaths are able to sleep soundly at night after doing something bad to someone is because they do not have a conscience to keep them awake. And who said you could only use dark psychology to go bad anyway? If you can hypnotize your boss into giving you a raise or a promotion, more power to you.